Greetings, Stonington Garden Club members, and welcome to the Photography Workshop. I'm Jill Kaur, and I serve as the Photography Chair, Communications Chair, Newsletter Editor, and I also serve as the GCA Zone 2 Photography Rep. I am actually recording this prior to the live workshop this coming Saturday, and in order to consolidate the information. This workshop will be about 1 hour, so tune in, and without hesitation, let's get started. Welcome. The purpose of this workshop will be to review some of the basic elements of the iPhone camera and to review tips for shooting landscapes. When you learn the tools you need to both take a beautiful photograph and enter a photograph in the November 11th Photography Bench Show. The theme of the virtual photography show is called The Awe of Autumn, and we hope to see many of our members send us beautiful photos of fall scenes. The leaves are turning and we live in a scenic part of the country where we can capture the season in so many ways. We on the photography committee look forward to your entries, and we will do our best to assist you in any way. If you are on the photography committee, we ask that you enter photographs in each of the 2 bench shows this year. We will utilize a GCA official judge to write comments on your photo entries. Her name is Susie Brewer, and she preceded me as the Zone 2 photography rep. I'm going to be sending her your digital photos via Google Slides, and she will make comments. There will be no award winners for these shows, but her comments will be helpful to you when and if you enter a GCA photo contest, where you will receive comments from Susie or other GCA judges. So this November's bench show will be a great experience in a friendly, non-competitive environment, but lay the groundwork for what we need to know should we enter a GCA photography show. As mentioned, today we will develop an understanding of some basic camera features of the iPhone. There are lots of ways to take a shot. You can point your camera toward a scene and simply press the shutter button, or you can adjust the parameters of the shot by learning a few simple techniques. Once you understand all these powerful camera tools, you will be taking higher quality shots that you'll be proud of and eager to share with your friends. In previous tutorials, we've explored both exposure and focus and how to set each on the iPhone camera. So what you need to learn today may already be familiar to some of you, but it's always a good idea to review so that we don't go back into bad habits of just pulling out our iPhones and pressing the shutter button. I've learned from many photography tutorials that I've taken that in order to take a great photo, it's most important to understand how the camera works. The videos that I learned from were referring to using a DSLR camera, but the iPhone camera is no exception. This tutorial today will focus, no pun intended, on teaching those important elements of your camera that you may or may not be familiar with, elements that will enhance the composition and the quality of your photo. These elements are camera settings, focus, exposure, and lens choice, all on the iPhone or smartphone. So get out your iPhones now or your other cameras and feel free to play along with the features as they are explained today. After we study camera settings, focus, exposure, and lens choice, we will delve into how to compose a photograph using your iPhone. Have you ever seen a photograph and responded with, wow, that shot is amazing, but not really knowing what it is about the shot that makes it so compelling? Well, chances are the photographer utilized some rather basic rules on how to frame and compose the shot in order to achieve a pleasing visual effect that guides the viewer's eye through and around the shot, then rest on the focal point of the image. Today, we're going to learn some basic elements of framing a shot and composition. We will learn where the eye travels when it views a photograph and where the eye lands on a shot, which is the actual focal point of the photograph. I'll be showing you a video in a few minutes that will offer you tips on understanding the settings of your camera. Whether you have an old iPhone 7 or an 8 or a 10 or an 11, the settings of the cameras are typically fairly uniform. It's important to remember that the camera has a mind of its own. It will make focus and exposure decisions on its own, but often those decisions are not the best for the photo that we're shooting. So it's our responsibility to make adjustments for that perfect shot. Our job is to tell the camera what to shoot, where to shoot, and what to feature in the shot. We will learn how to go inside the settings of our iPhone cameras to make our photos easy to shoot and most pleasing to view. So again, pull out your cameras now and play along with the instructors in these videos. One note, if you have an iPhone 11, go to your camera and click on the camera icon. You'll see these choices for photo options. If you take your finger and scroll up, you will see this. Earlier iPhone models had these little icons that you see along the bottom of your screen, actually on top of the screen or maybe on the side of the screen. But on the 11 or later, you need to scroll up to see them. So just know this when viewing the video that I'll be showing you now. The correct iPhone camera settings.
Now, as far as I know, almost nobody likes learning about iPhone camera settings. And I get that. It's not the most exciting topic, it's kind of technical, and you're here to learn about photography, not settings. Well, I get it, but here's the problem. Unless you get the camera settings exactly right, your photos will not be of the highest possible quality. And because of that, I've created this video where I'll walk you through all the most important iPhone camera settings, and I'll show you how to pick the correct values for each setting so that your photos will always turn out great. Now, if you can't hear me, please tap on this video to turn on the sound, and then we can get started. So to find the iPhone camera settings, we'll start by opening the Settings app on the home screen of your iPhone. From here, we'll scroll all the way down until you find Camera. Select Camera, and that will open the camera settings. Here, the first option that I think is really important is the grid setting. And by default, the grid is turned off. But if you turn the grid on, the next time you launch the iPhone camera app, you'll have 2 horizontal and 2 vertical grid lines on the top of the viewfinder. And these grid lines are really, really useful when you're composing your shots. The next setting that I think is really, really important is the Formats option. So I'm going to tap on Formats, and this brings up 2 options. And I can choose between high efficiency and most compatible image file formats. So for those of you who are more technically minded, high efficiency corresponds to HEIF image file format, while most compatible corresponds to JPEG file format. High efficiency is a file format that's mostly used by Apple, whereas most compatible, or JPEG, is actually the most popular image file format in the world. So if you don't know what these acronyms mean, don't worry. You want to make sure you select the most compatible option. The benefit of high efficiency is that your photos will take up less storage space, but most compatible has 2 very substantial benefits. Number 1, these files are indeed more compatible, especially if you send them over to your friends who do not use Apple devices. But number 2, which is even more important to me, is the fact that most compatible images will actually be of higher quality. And if you compare high efficiency and most compatible photos side by side, you'll see that the most compatible images will actually have more detail, and thus their quality will be better. And because of that, I strongly recommend that you choose the most compatible option. And finally, at the bottom of the screen, you'll see HDR settings. For now, I want you to take the Auto HDR option and turn that off. And the Keep Normal Photo option should be turned on. So now that we've changed these settings, let's open up the iPhone camera app and let's see what kind of options are available there. So now when you open the camera app, the first thing you're going to see are the grid lines. So now on the screen, we have 2 horizontal and 2 vertical lines, and those are the grid lines. And they'll be really, really useful for composing your photos. Now, besides the grid lines, there are a whole bunch of other buttons on the screen. So let's walk through them one by one, and let me quickly explain what each of these buttons means. So we'll start with the top left-hand corner, where you have this icon showing 3 overlapping circles. And if you tap your finger there, the filter menu opens up on the right-hand side. And here you can swipe through all sorts of different filters, such as vivid warm, vivid cool, dramatic, and so on. And the way you can tell that one of the filters has been turned on is by the fact that the 3 overlapping circles icon is now in color. So every time these circles are in color, a filter has been turned on. And if you don't want that, all you have to do is tap on that icon again and go back to original. I personally prefer not using these filters because there's so much you can do to improve your images in post-processing. And I like to take control of the editing process. And because of that, I personally never use these filters. So I'm going to stick to the original, which is no filter. And now to exit the filter menu, I'm going to press the 3 overlapping circled icon again. Now, the next option you see on the screen is the self timer. And you have the choice between the self timer being off, or you can select 3 or 10 second self timer. Most of the time, you want to leave this off, which is what we're going to do right now. Now, the third option, which looks like several circles, which are now crossed out, stands for live photos. And when this option is yellow, that's when you know that live photos are turned on. So the live photos functionality essentially records a short video just before and just after the photo that you take. The general guideline is to keep live photos on every time there's movement in the scene or whenever you're taking photos of people. Since we have some moving water here, I'm going to leave the live photos option on. Next up, you see the letters HDR. So if you tap on HDR, you can once again choose between auto, on, or off. For now, let's leave it at auto, and a lot of the times the auto option will serve you best. So there's no harm in selecting auto most of the time. And finally, you'll see the flash icon, and you have the choice between auto, on, and off. And with flash, my general recommendation is to keep the flash off. So that's the option I'm going to select. And you can see that now the flash is crossed out. Now, the reason I don't recommend using the flash too much is because the flash of the iPhone is relatively weak. It only works well when your subjects are really close to you. And even then, you may end up with unnatural looking colors and other potential image quality problems. And because of that, it's better to leave the flash off unless you absolutely need it. But for most photography situations, even in low light, I recommend keeping the flash off. And those are all the options you have on the left-hand side of the screen. And top right, you'll see the camera icon with 2 arrows in the middle. And if you tap on that icon, you'll switch to the front-facing camera. And this is me. And if I now go ahead and take a photo, this is how you can take selfies with the iPhone. Now, the one thing you should keep in mind, though, is that the front-facing camera is substantially worse in terms of image quality than the back cameras. So while it's fun to take selfies with the front-facing camera, generally speaking, you should only do serious photography with the back cameras because those are substantially better in terms of image quality. So I'm going to switch back to the back camera by tapping that icon again. Now, as we move down, you'll see the big shutter button, and that's pretty straightforward. You just press that and a photo is taken. Now, to the left from shutter, you'll see a circle that says 1x. And this option is only on the iPhones that come with 2 cameras. So if you tap on that 1x turns into 2x. And now you're using the telephoto lens of the iPhone. If you tap on 2x again, you're back to the wide angle lens. Not all iPhones have this option, so you'll only see this on the screen if your iPhone has 2 lenses. And finally, on the right-hand side of the screen, you have all the different shooting modes of the iPhone camera. So currently, the photo mode is selected, and you can tell that because the letters photo are yellow. But as you swipe your finger vertically up or down the screen, you can switch between all the different photo and video modes of the iPhone camera. So if we go down, you have the video mode, which is the mode you'll be using for taking regular videos. Under that, there's a slow-mo mode, for taking slow motion videos. So those are videos where everything's moving really, really slow. Under that, you have time-lapse videos, which are essentially the opposite of slow motion. So time-lapse videos are moving really, really fast. If we then go up above the regular photo option, you'll see the portrait mode. The portrait mode is not available on all iPhones. We'll cover portrait mode extensively in a future video, but for now, just know that this is the option you'll be using to create beautifully blurred backgrounds when taking portrait photos. Next to portrait, you'll find the square mode. And this is just like the regular photo mode, but this time you're only taking square photos. And while this may seem like a great idea, what's really happening behind the scenes is that the iPhone is cropping your photos before they're even taken. And when you take a square photo like this, there's nothing you can do to expand it back into the full size. But if you take a regular wide photo, it's very easy to crop that into a square. And because of that, my recommendation is to not use the square mode. You can always take a regular wide photo and crop it into a square if you have to, but you can't really do the opposite. And because of that, I recommend that you avoid the square mode. And finally, there's the panel mode, which is what you use for creating beautiful panoramic photos. But for now, I'm gonna go back to photo. In the photo mode, I'll go ahead and take another photo. And if I want to review the photos I've just taken, what I have to do is tap the photo icon at the bottom right-hand corner, and this is how you can preview all the photos that you've just taken. So there you have it. We've just reviewed all the most important iPhone camera settings and shooting modes. Now, as you can see from the techniques I just shared, the iPhone camera looks really
Okie doke. Here is an example of what the portrait mode of the camera will do. And this gentleman referred to it earlier. He didn't say much about it, but here's a photo showing what an actual image looks like. What happens in the portrait mode is it makes the background of the photograph fuzzy so that the focal point of the image is highlighted. What it's really doing is changing what we call the f-stop, or this is what it does in a DSLR camera, to a low number. The lens is actually opening up wide to reduce the depth of field. And again, we can discuss all this later or in a subsequent tutorial, or you can read about it. But it's a great feature on many, many iPhone cameras, and it takes stunning photographs that used to only be achieved using a DSLR camera. There's another really cool feature on the later models of the iPhones, and it may have just started with the iPhone 11. I know it's included with the iPhone 12 as well, is the night shot feature. The camera takes great night shots, even in very, very low light. It's imperative, however, that you hold the camera very steady when you take your shot. The photo on the left was taken without the night mode feature. The shot on the right was using the night mode feature. And as you can see, the photo on the right is much more dramatic with much better lighting. I shot this last week in my kitchen. This is a bowl of apples. It was extremely dark in the house. I had just turned all the lights off, but for some reason I wanted to test out the night mode feature. So these are two photographs. The photo on the left was shot without the night mode feature on, and the photo on the right was shot with the night mode feature on. And I will say to you that even in the very dark, I mean, to the naked eye, that bowl of apples looked like the photo on the on the left. So there's some miracle that happens inside this phone. It actually opens up the lens for 3 seconds and it gathers as much light as possible inside the camera to give more illumination to the shot. So it's a wonderful little feature. Now we're going to watch a second video that will help us take crisper shots, especially when we're shooting in lower light or the subject in front of the camera is moving. So again, get out your cameras and follow along for 5 tricks for sharp iPhone photos.
Are you tired of taking blurry photos with your iPhone? If so, you're definitely not alone. Most iPhone users get blurry photos more often than they should, but it doesn't have to be that way. My name is Emil Pakarklis. I'm the founder of iPhone Photography School, and in this video I'll share with you 5 simple tricks so that you'll never take blurry iPhone photos again. Now, if you can't hear me, please tap on this video to turn on the sound, and then we can get started. One of the most common reasons iPhone photos end up blurry is because the focus is not set correctly. So how do you set focus on the iPhone? Actually, it's really simple. Let me show you how to do it. So when you first open the camera app of the iPhone, you'll see that the iPhone has already picked somewhat of an average focus for this photo. And we have these beautiful flowers in the foreground, as well as the street buildings in the background, but neither of them is really in focus because the iPhone has tried to make sure that as many parts of the photo as possible are in focus, and as a result, nothing is really in focus. So in order to fix that, all you have to do is use your finger and tap it on the screen where you want the focus to be. So right now, I'm going to tap on this flower in the foreground, and you'll see this yellow box appear, and that means that the focus is now set on the flowers in the foreground. Now, if I want to set the focus on the buildings in the background instead, all I have to do is tap my finger on these buildings in the background, and you'll see that now these buildings are in focus, but the flowers in the foreground are no longer sharp. Now, when I set the focus here on these buildings in the background, the image also became a little bit darker. And that's because when you're setting focus, you're also adjusting how dark or how bright the photo is going to be. So if that's a problem, it's really easy to fix. And all you have to do is simply swipe your finger up or down the screen like this, and you can make the photo darker or brighter if you need to do that. So now that I'm happy with both focus and exposure, I'm going to go ahead and take another photo. And if we compare these two photos side by side, you'll see that in the first photo, the flowers in the foreground are nice and sharp, but the buildings in the background are out of focus. While in the second photo, the buildings in the background are in focus, but the flowers in the foreground are no longer sharp. So the bottom line is this. If you want to make sure that your iPhone photos turn out great, you should always set the focus yourself. Otherwise, you're leaving your photos up to chance. Sometimes they'll work out, at other times they won't, but you will not get consistent results. Now, the technique I just shared with you works really great, but there's one problem. Every time you take a shot, or every time something changes in the scene, the iPhone will automatically reset back to autofocus, and whatever changes you made to focus and exposure will simply disappear. Now, obviously it's a problem, especially if you want to take several photos where the focus is the same. But luckily, there's a very easy way to fix that, and that is by locking the focus. So let me show you how to do that. So in order to lock the focus, all you have to do is simply tap and hold your finger where you want the focus to be set. So I want to set the focus on this wall in the background. So I'm going to simply tap and hold my finger there for a couple of seconds until the letters A, E, A, F lock appear at the top of the screen. And that tells me that both focus and exposure are now locked. And no matter how many photos I take, and no matter what kind of changes happen in the scene, I can be confident that the focus will remain unchanged until I switch it back off. Now, this technique is particularly useful when you're expecting a great photo opportunity and you want to be prepared in advance. For example, I'm sitting on the side of this little beautiful street, and I know that eventually some people will walk past me. And when that happens, I want to be ready to take the photo. And because of that, I'm locking the focus in advance. And I'm going to already frame the shot, and I'll shoot it through this beautiful green grass in the foreground so that my subjects will be partially obscured. So now I simply have to sit here and wait until someone walks past me. Okay, so now I think the moment is right. So I'm going to take several photos, and you can see that no matter how many photos I take, the focus remains locked, and the beautiful green grass in the foreground is still blurred out. And these are the kind of photos I can only take by locking the focus of my iPhone. Now, besides incorrectly set focus, one of the most common reasons why our iPhone photos end up blurry is called motion blur. And motion blur becomes a real problem when you're shooting in low light situations or indoors. Now, the reason motion blur is a problem in low light is because in low light, the shutter of your iPhone has to stay open for longer to let in the same amount of light. But any movement while the shutter is open results in blurry photos. And because of that, it's really important that in low light situations, you hold your iPhone as steady as possible. So let me quickly show you what happens when you're shooting in low light and the iPhone is shaking. Now, as you can see, the photo we just took is really blurry, and obviously that's not what we want. So let me show you how to correctly hold the iPhone to keep it as steady as possible. Now, over the years, I've experimented with many different grip styles, and I can honestly tell you that this one is the best one. So if you're right-handed, like I am, you want to start by placing your left palm in front of you like this. Then you place your iPhone in the middle of your palm, like so. You want to use your thumb to support one side of the iPhone and your little finger to support the other side of the iPhone. And the three fingers stay at the back of the iPhone to support it that way. Using this grip, you can quickly switch between portrait and landscape orientation, or you can move the iPhone in any way you want, and no matter what you do, the iPhone isn't going to drop. It's a very steady grip. Then you can use your right hand to further support the iPhone from below, and now you're actually using two hands to keep the iPhone steady. And finally, you want to use the thumb of your right hand to adjust any settings on the screen or to gently press the shutter. And this is how you can hold your iPhone as steady as possible. Now, if conditions permit, you can further stabilize your body and your hands by leaning against a vertical wall like this, or alternatively, you can support your hands against a horizontal surface. For example, right now, I am supporting my hands against my knee, and my knee isn't moving much, and because of that, I can get an even steadier shot. So now, let's take another test photo, this time trying to keep the iPhone as steady as possible. Now, if we look at the photo we just took, you'll see how sharp it is. And if we compare the two images side by side, you'll see how important it is to keep your iPhone as steady as possible. Now, when you're shooting in low light conditions, it's not enough to simply keep your iPhone steady. If you want your photos to be perfectly sharp, it's also important that whatever you're taking a photo of is also steady. For example, now I'm going to take a portrait photo of my wife and our beautiful baby, but as it happens with children, they're moving a lot. And as they keep moving around, and as I try to take photos, these photos don't turn out that sharp. And that's because motion blur also works the same way if my subjects are moving. However, if I can ask them to remain perfectly still for just a moment, so there's absolutely no movement of any kind, if I can catch a still moment, and if I can then take a photo, then that photo is going to be substantially sharper. So the bottom line is this. In low light conditions, if you want your photos to be perfectly sharp, you have to make sure that you hold your iPhone steady and that whatever you're taking a photo of also isn't moving. If those two things happen, then you can be sure that your photos will end up sharp. And finally, another quick tip I have for you is to always keep the lens of your iPhone clean. Now, this may sound obvious, but unless the lens of your iPhone is completely clean, your photos will not be as sharp or as clear as they should be. So, how do you clean the lens of your iPhone? Actually, it's really simple. The way I do it is simply using my t-shirt or my sweater to gently rub the lens like so. Now, you don't want to press too hard, and you want to be really careful if there's any sand on the lens. Because if there's sand on the lens, and if you then rub it, there's a chance you might scratch the lens, and that's not good. So if you suspect there might be sand or something else that could scratch the lens, all you have to do is simply blow air on the lens using your mouth, like so. And when all the sand is gone, you can then safely clean it using your t-shirt. Just don't do it too hard, and get in the habit of always checking whether your lens is clean before you start shooting. Because if the lens is not clean, your photos will not look good. Now, as you can see from the techniques I just shared,
I have to say that I have owned probably every number of iPhone on the market. I am now owner of an iPhone 11 Pro, and I'll probably be purchasing the 12 at some point in the near future. And I'm not sure I've ever cleaned the lenses on my iPhone. So, there's something for all of us to learn. Speaking of iPhone lenses, if you own an iPhone version 7 or beyond, you will see 2 or 3 lenses on the back of the camera. And I don't know if you can see my little phone here, but I have 3 on the back of mine. Choosing the right lens can often make or break a photo. So let's explore the details of each lens and learn how to use them for our photography. Here's an example of a shot that was taken at the Florence Griswold Museum overlooking the river. I was in one spot and I shot this with my iPhone set on the widest angle, allowing for the least amount of magnification, but the widest focal angle. The iPhone lens is equivalent to, at least at the widest angle, is equivalent to about a 13 millimeter DSLR camera lens. A good way to remember lens numbers is the lower the number of the camera lens, the wider the angle of the shot. So a 13 millimeter lens, whether it be on your iPhone or regular camera, offers the widest angle, and it's great for shooting landscapes. On my iPhone, it corresponds to the little number 0.5 on the bottom of the screen. Standing in the same spot, I chose a different camera lens to shoot at a closer viewpoint. On my iPhone 11, it was the little number 1 on the bottom of the screen. As you can see, the view angle has decreased, meaning I don't get as much image on the screen, but the magnification has increased. So this is equivalent to shooting with about a 26 millimeter just conventional camera lens. And as I said before, the previous shot was equivalent to about a 16 millimeter. Do you need to know these numbers? No, but if you're into photography, it's kind of interesting. Finally, and again, while standing in the same spot, this photograph was taken using the telephoto lens on my iPhone 11 Pro, which is equivalent to about a 52 millimeter lens. These photos decrease the angle of the view even more, but it magnifies the scene. So on my camera, this was the little 2x number on the bottom of the screen. Remember, I didn't move 1 inch to shoot all 3 photos. And I think the instructor explained to you the difference in shooting using some of the earlier camera versions in 2 lenses. So know that that's a possibility with your lens. If you take a shot and you decide you've got too much image and you end up cropping that shot significantly, it's going to reduce the resolution of the shot. And it's going to reduce it to a level where it's not, you lose an extraordinary amount of quality. So try to get as much of your image that you intend to finally get on the camera and shoot from there. Here's what the actual phone screen looks like. This is a picture of my camera. I did a screenshot, went outside and took a picture looking down to BB Cove. As you can see, the number 2x is highlighted. The lens is set at the telephoto setting. This magnifies the image and reduces the amount of image on the screen. On most of these cameras, if you take your finger and you hold it on the highlighted number, this little wheel pops up. You can adjust this wheel for even further magnification or less magnification depending on your choice. Also note that the grid lines can be seen on the screen here, which I use all the time when I take photos with my iPhone camera. They're especially helpful when aligning a horizon to the screen. And because we all live on the water and we all like to take shots of the coastline, and there's usually a very pronounced horizon. These are really, really helpful. If I press the number 1x on my lens, on my screen, it zooms out even more on the image. So you can see more image on the screen and the magnification decreases. So here's an example of that wider angle shot. And if I had held the camera horizontally like I should have, I think this would be even more apparent. This shot was taken with the 0.5x setting, which increases the amount of the image that can be seen on the screen even more, and it makes the shot at the widest angle possible. The magnification of the shot is, of course, decreased. Our Laura Frommer is not part of this actual video, but she submitted these 2 photos for our review. I love these photos, and I will show you or explain to you kind of what happened here. The photo on the left is a much wider angle shot than the photo on the right. So she used 2 different lenses here. The photo on the right features the focal point of the image, namely the pot of flowers. You can see the lemons much closer, and you can see that beautiful wooden wheelbarrow with flowers overflowing. The photo on the left is a little bit busy, and it certainly needed to be, this shot certainly needed to be zoomed in. And it's interesting because the photo on the right actually won Laura, I think, Best in Show in one of the GCA photo contests. So it's a beautiful photograph. And Laura, thank you for submitting it for the workshop today. Our last video will take us to the field as we learn how to set up our camera to frame and position for a beautiful shot. We will review the use of lines and shapes in a photograph. And just like designing a floral centerpiece, there are rules of visual composition that make up a great photograph. You don't need an expensive camera to correctly frame and shoot a great landscape. It just takes some understanding of how to guide the viewer's eye. The following video illustrates these techniques beautifully. It's from an educational resource called Photography Life, so enjoy.
Right now we're overlooking Glacier National Park, and as you can see, the scene behind us is absolutely beautiful. You've got mountains, a river, and a lake in the distance. And if you're new to landscape photography, all of this can actually be kind of overwhelming. Where do you start? How do you frame an image? Well, that's what we're going to talk about in this section, framing and composition. Now behind me, you can see all of these lines and shapes, including a strong V between the 2 mountain peaks. And that makes for a very compelling element that could be in a composition. Later on, we're going to be talking about different landscapes other than just this particular one, and showing you how to compose images depending upon the scene. So why are framing and composition so important in landscape photography? Well, it all has to do with guiding the viewer's eye through your photograph and also creating an image that's internally cohesive. For example, you might look at another photographer's image and understand that you really like it, even if you can't exactly pinpoint why. A lot of times that's because of the photographer's framing and composition. Similarly, you might be at a beautiful landscape with amazing light and take nice images, but something in them is lacking. Again, that could be an ineffective composition. By learning some of the concepts that we're going to be talking about today, like lines, forms, balance, and simplicity, you'll be able to take your images and make them as compelling as possible. So first, let's talk about lines. Now, lines are everywhere in landscape photography. You can see just in the scene behind us, there's the line between the mountains and the sky. There's lines going across the face of the mountain. There's the tree line that swoops down across the photograph. And it's not just limited to this landscape. In most photographs that you take, you'll have a horizon line, or lines from tree trunks that go through your photograph, or even a river that winds through the frame. Lines can be straight, they can be jagged, they can be curved, but if you use them effectively, no matter what, they will make very powerful elements of composition. Now, lines may seem basic, but they're the most effective way to guide your viewer's eye from one portion of the frame to the other. For example, if I've got a wide angle shot with a beautiful background like the one behind me, and also an important foreground, it can help to include a leading line like a river from the foreground to the background to tie the two together in the viewer's eye. Now, there are many different types of lines that you can use in landscape photography and also different ways to use them. For example, you've got the horizon line. Especially when the horizon is flat, it divides the photograph into two different parts that the viewer can explore. Aside from straight lines going across the frame like your horizon, lines can also be very powerful when they have recognizable forms. For example, diagonal lines can lead the viewer's eye dynamically from one side of the frame to the other because they're kind of an unstable shape. Also, you've got lines like C curves or S curves that guide your viewer's eye along a more meandering path rather than straight from one point to the other. And these can be very pleasing aspects of a photograph because they're recognizable. We like C's and S's and we see them all the time. Also, they're a little bit more calm than dramatic diagonals or flat horizon lines would be. So when you're actually taking photographs, pay attention to the scene in front of you. If there aren't any obvious lines, consider moving around so that you can add them as an element of composition. Next up are shapes. Whereas lines guide the viewer's eye from one portion of the frame to the other, shapes provide an internal structure to your photograph. Take triangles, for example. They're a very common shape in nature. You'll see them everywhere if you look for them. You've got trees, mountains, valleys, and even if you use a wide-angle lens, the way that the foreground stretches into the background can make a triangular shape. Now, triangles aren't the only shape that you might photograph. There's also circles or semicircles like the moon or a rainbow stretching across the sky. You might also photograph squares or diamonds or stars, although not in most photographs. These things tend to be a little bit more rare, but they do add structure to the way that your image is formed. For example, take a look at this photograph. It's a heart shape, and that's the main element of composition. In fact, if it weren't for the heart shape, this photo wouldn't even be worth taking in the first place. So when you're out exploring for landscapes to photograph, pay attention to the shapes that you see in your scene. Because shapes are such an effective way to add structure to your composition, they're very important elements of most photographs. In this particular scene, for example, there's tons of triangles and semicircles and squares that can make for very effective compositions. Even in this one location, I have so many ways to frame my photograph just because of the shapes. In a lot of landscapes, you'll also encounter texture. Now, texture is very important because by definition, it's not an empty area of the frame. It attracts interest. At the same time, texture provides a way for light to hit an object and sculpt it in a way that shows shadows. In the scene behind me, for example, there's a lot of texture on the tops of these mountains, as you can see in the rocks. Now, on one hand, this just adds a lot of visual interest. Otherwise, the mountains would be very flat and they wouldn't be quite as interesting. At the same time, all of the deep shadows and highlights of the texture ends up making the mountain appear much more three-dimensional. And all of this adds together to create a much more compelling image. One of the best ways to make a photograph look intentional and deliberate is to photograph patterns. Now, whenever you have one particular shape repeated in several different places within the same photograph, it adds a lot of visual interest. In this scene, for example, you've got two V shapes in different sections of the image, and together that makes the photograph appear much more cohesive, as if I intended to frame it exactly how I did. Whenever I'm out taking landscape pictures, I'm always thinking about patterns and repetition just because they're so important in a photograph. If you see an image that has a repeated element throughout the frame, you know that the photographer did not create that accidentally. The composition was designed with purpose. Similar to patterns and repetition, another element of composition that you'll find in a lot of landscapes is called relationships. And in this case, you might have two completely dissimilar items that are tied to one another because of some other factor. For example, if I'm taking a picture of a landscape with a bright orange flower in the foreground and it's at sunset, so the light is being cast bright orange on the mountain in the background, then these two unrelated items, the mountain and the flower, would be tied together just because of their color. Take a look at this photo for an example. In this case, you can see that the top and the bottom of this photograph are tied together, even though they might not appear similar at first glance. But look at the shapes in the clouds and then the rocks along the foreground. As you can see, they're both lines that go a similar distance across the frame. This repetition ties the image together and makes for a much more compelling photo. So now what I want to do is take all of these elements and show you how to use them together to create a single composition. Now, obviously, the light behind me isn't perfect, but this is more of just a scouting photograph. It's always good to have a composition in mind before the light gets good. So let's see how all of this looks. So in this scene, one of the first things that you'll notice is this V shape between the mountains. And that's a very strong element of composition. On one hand, it's a reverse triangle, so it attracts a lot of attention and it provides some structure to the photograph. On the other hand, you can also tell that the mountains nearby these front two mountains have a very similar shape. So that repetition actually attracts a lot of attention and it works really well in a photograph. At the same time, at the bottom of the image, you can see that there's a lake. And that's a nice surprise for people who are looking at the photograph. They might take a minute to see the photograph in its entirety before noticing that there's a lake. If I zoom back out, then you can also see that there's a lot of nice tree lines in the foreground that again can lead the eye up through the frame and around to where the mountains are. It's all about guiding the viewer's eye. At the same time, there's also a lot of texture in this frame, which makes it significantly more interesting and adds a lot of depth. Especially look at the mountain on the right. Now there's a lot of deep shadows in it that adds texture and a three-dimensional feel, and that wouldn't be the same if it were just a flat, empty mountain. Also, look at the lightly colored lines on both the left and right-hand mountains next to the V. As you can see, those lines lead the viewer's eye nearer to the center of the frame, and that provides a sense of internal unity to the photograph. So now let's zoom out and show the rest of this scene. And as you can see, it's a very, very pretty landscape, but the reason that I focused on the right-hand side rather than this part is because of the very pronounced V in the right-hand side. Now here there are some V shapes, but not to the same degree as there were farther over. Also, look at this river down here. As you can see, it's a very interesting element of the frame, but there's a reason that I didn't include it in my final photograph. Now, as compelling as it could be, you can see that this river does not really have a very interesting background behind it. The mountain is not very interesting, and there isn't the same V shape that I got earlier. Now, as it is, the river does guide the viewer's eye, but not towards anything significant. The background just really isn't that compelling in this case. Now, maybe if I were farther down next to the river, I might be able to find a better background and then definitely use that as an element of my composition. As it is, though, that V shape is probably the most compelling part of this particular scene.
All right. Well, I hope that was helpful to you. It certainly was to me when I watched it for the first time. Here's an example of a shot. I took this a couple of weeks ago when I was at Point Judith. And I feel like it's maybe a good example of what this instructor is referring to in terms of leading lines and balance in a shot. He doesn't talk a lot about balance. He talks more about leading lines, objects inside shots, but and repetition. But I like this because I feel like the stairs lead the eye to the top of the berm. The clouds lead the eyes even to a greater degree to the two objects on top of the berm. There's a boulder on the left and a cyclist on the right. The cyclist would hardly be noticed if the other objects were not taking the viewer's eye to him. I also like that boulder in the lower right corner because I think that it creates not only balance in the photography, but it sort of mimics the shape of the clouds as well. So that's my little suggestion. This was sent in by Laura Frommer. I love this shot. This is a wonderful example of a lighthouse. And please notice the dramatic leading lines that take the eye from the corners of the frame up to the lighthouse itself. This is a beautifully balanced photo as well. I love the clouds in the background. I love the textures of the rocks, and this is just a great shot. Again, I think it's a perfect example of how leading lines guide the viewer to the focal point. Let's talk about the bench show. There are 4 classes for the fall photography bench show. I'm going to be sending you this in an email. If you want to take notes now, you can, but all of this is not only in our directory, but it's also on our website, and I will send you an email as well. I've been getting a couple of photographs in the mail, and I'm asking those who have submitted photographs already to check out the website and our directory and send them to me via this prescribed schedule. So the classes are as follows. Class 1 is a wide angle color fall landscape shot. A photograph depicting fall is the important feature of this shot. Number 2, a medium angle color fall landscape shot. There might be some similarities between 1 and 2, so just send me your photograph, and if it appears to need to be put into a different class, I will definitely assign it as such. Number 3, a close-up fall landscape shot, such as a close-up of a flower or an insect as it sits on a flower or a leaf. Or you can take a photo of one leaf and show the beautiful colors and the veins and the parts of it. And 4, any of the above in black and white. So those are our classes. How to enter a bench show. The first thing you're going to need to do is label your photo. So save your photo to a documents file and rename it to your first name and then underscore it in your last name. If you don't know how to do this, it's totally okay. You can call Laura or Dodie or me, or just not do it. The photo, because I will do it for you. If you send it to me in an email, I can file it and I'll put your name. So no big deal if you're not comfortable doing this. This should be an easy process for us. It is necessary, however, to label photos if you do enter a GCA photo contest, and they will probably throw your photo out if you don't. So if you want to learn, we're here to help you. You can also, we need to accept JPEG photos too. And if you send me anything other than a JPEG, probably won't accept it, or I'll need to convert it over to a JPEG. But the JPEG file is the most common file. And remember earlier in this video where the instructor talked about most compatible setting on your iPhone? Check that off and you'll never have a problem with shooting anything other than a JPEG. We also cannot accept photos that are greater in size to 5 megabytes. Again, if this detail is not familiar to you just email me your photo and I'll help label it for you, et cetera, et cetera. Also, don't worry about the size because most cameras will shoot, iPhone cameras will shoot at 5 megabytes or below, so no big deal. Once you've labeled your photograph, you're going to email it to me at newslettereditor@gmail.com. And the subject line of your email should read, "The Awe of Autumn," and followed by your name. So, "The Awe of Autumn, Jill Core." When I see that in the subject, I'm going to highlight that email because I know that that email has a photograph ready for me to file. That way, when I receive your email, I will know by the subject that you are submitting a photo to the bench show. The email content should include the class number and a description of your photo. Tell me where it was taken and when, and be sure to include your full name in the email to me, plus your phone number. That would really help because if I have any questions and I need to call you, I will. And finally, give your photo a name. Call it a few words like bee on flower, falling leaves, something catchy like that. As mentioned previously, our GCA judge is Susie Brewer, and Susie is from the Darien Garden Club. And she will be offering comments on each of the photos that we send her via Google Slides. After you send me your photographs, I will send them to Susie. I will make them in a little slide, put them all in a little slideshow. I'll send them to Susie, and she will type comments on a shared document so that she will not have to travel all the way here to look at your photograph. She can do this from her home in her computer. So all of this will be done virtually. At the November 11th bench show, which will probably be virtual, I can show the slides of all of our beautiful photographs to our general membership. And this is kind of an example of what those slides will look like. I will create the slides. I will insert your photo. Your photo will be on the right of the slide, and on the left of the slide will be your title, Pumpkin Farm, or whatever the title of you might label something like this, and then your name under that. And then the judge's comments will also be noted. Only 2 or 3 sentences. They're not going to be any scathing reviews. She's going to be very positive, and she's going to, if she gives any constructive criticism, she will offer that in a very, very positive way. So that's it for our photography workshop. And again, this is going to be filmed, and probably by the time if you see this, you probably will not have been present for the live workshop, but this is it, and I'm really looking forward to you guys sending your photos. You can send them in anytime between October 25th, I believe, Saturday, and November 3rd. So you've got plenty of time. Get your cameras out there, start taking some great photos, and please don't hesitate to call me or email if you have any questions. Again, thanks for sharing. Bye-bye.